The woman in the window wasn't looking at me. She was looking at something standing behind her. At the time, I didn't understand that. I was sitting inside my car across the street from her house at 2:47 in the morning when she suddenly appeared behind the glass. The call had come less than 10 minutes earlier. Her voice had been shaking. Not panicked, not screaming, just scared in a way that sounded genuine. "He's back." That was all she said before giving me the address. I had spent the previous 2 weeks investigating a man she claimed had disappeared years ago. A man she believed had recently returned. I wasn't even sure I believed her. At least, not completely. Until that night. The neighborhood was quiet. No traffic, no dogs barking. Nothing, just rows of dark houses and the faint glow of streetlights. The woman stood perfectly still in the front hallway. The light above her illuminated one side of her face while the rest remained in shadow. For a second, I thought she was looking directly at me. Then she slowly raised her hand. Not to wave, not to signal for help. She pointed behind herself. My eyes followed the gesture automatically. The hallway behind her looked empty. I narrowed my eyes. Nothing, just darkness. Then her expression changed. Her face tightened. Her eyes widened slightly, and she slowly shook her head. Not at me, at something behind her. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I opened my car door and stepped outside. The moment my foot touched the pavement, every light inside the house went out. The entire place dropped into darkness. I froze. The window became a black mirror. For one brief second, before my eyes adjusted, I saw another shape standing directly behind her. A person, close enough to touch her. Then, everything vanished. I started moving. Fast. By the time I reached the front gate, the lights suddenly came back on. The hallway was empty. No woman. No second figure. Nothing. I stared through the glass. The house looked completely normal. The front door remained locked. The curtains weren't moving. There wasn't a single sound coming from inside. I pulled out my phone and called her immediately. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. My heart was pounding harder now. I walked around the side of the property, checking every window I could see. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken glass. No signs of forced entry. No movement. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside the house was watching me. I returned to the front porch and knocked loudly. Still nothing. A minute later, my phone buzzed. A text message. From her. I immediately opened it. The message contained only 4 words. Don't come inside. I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. He's still here. The blood drained from my face. I looked up at the house. Every window was dark now. Every room appeared empty. But someone was inside. Someone close enough to her that she couldn't call. Someone who apparently knew I was outside. I typed back immediately. Where are you? The 3 little typing dots appeared, then disappeared, appeared again, then vanished completely. No reply. A few seconds later, something moved upstairs. A shadow. Quick, gone almost instantly. I wasn't even sure I really saw it. But then another text arrived. This time, it wasn't from her number. It came from an unknown number. The message read, "You should have listened to her." I felt every muscle in my body tighten, because there was no possible way a stranger should have known I was standing outside that house. And in that moment, I realized something that would completely change the investigation. The person inside wasn't hiding from me. They knew exactly where I was. And somehow, they had been expecting me. I didn't leave. Looking back, maybe I should have. A normal person probably would have called the police, waited across the street, and let them handle it. But private investigators develop bad habits. Curiosity becomes stronger than common sense. And right then, I needed answers. I kept staring at the unknown message. You should have listened to her. The sender had no profile picture, no name, nothing. I called the number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. The house remained silent. The longer I stood there, the more uncomfortable I became. It wasn't just because someone might be inside with her. It was the feeling that somebody was watching me from behind a curtain, tracking every move, waiting for me to do something. I stepped off the porch and slowly walked around the property again. The backyard was surrounded by a tall wooden fence. Most of the neighboring houses were dark. A few porch lights glowed in the distance, but nobody seemed awake. Halfway along the fence line, my flashlight landed on something unusual. A fresh footprint. The ground had been soaked by rain earlier that week. Most of the yard had dried, but a few patches remained soft. The footprint was deep, recent, very recent. I crouched beside it. Large boot. Probably male. Definitely not Rachel's. The print led toward the rear of the property, then disappeared near the fence. I scanned the area carefully. That's when I noticed one of the fence panels wasn't attached properly. Someone had loosened the screws. The board could swing outward just enough for a person to squeeze through. My pulse quickened. Whoever had been coming here wasn't entering through the front door. They already had another way in. I took several photos and sent them to my work phone for documentation. The second I stood up, another message appeared. Same unknown number. Still looking? I froze. The message had arrived less than 10 seconds after I photographed the footprint. There was only one explanation. Someone could see me. Right now. I spun around and shined my flashlight across the neighboring yards. Nothing. No movement. No figures. Just darkness. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The person texting me was close. Very close. I suddenly understood why Rachel sounded so terrified during our first meeting. This wasn't random harassment. This wasn't somebody sending anonymous messages online. This was personal. Whoever was behind this wanted control. They wanted her afraid. And now they wanted me afraid too. My phone rang. The sudden sound nearly made me jump. It was Rachel. I answered immediately. Where are you? I asked. Her breathing was uneven. I got out. What? I left through the garage. For a second, I couldn't process what she was saying. You left the house? 10 minutes ago. I looked back toward the front window. The hallway where I'd seen her standing was completely empty. My stomach dropped. If you're not inside, I said slowly, then who was in that window? Silence, then she whispered something that made the hair on my arm stand up. I was never standing in the hallway. I stopped breathing for a moment. What do you mean? When I texted you the address, I was hiding in my bedroom closet. I felt sick because I knew exactly what I had seen. A woman. Same hair color. Same build. Same face. Standing in the front hallway, pointing behind herself. And if Rachel was telling the truth, then whoever had been standing in that window wasn't Rachel at all. A car suddenly started somewhere nearby. The engine turned over once, then again. I turned toward the street. A black SUV sat parked 2 houses down. I was almost certain it hadn't been there before. The headlights remained off. The engine kept running. Waiting, watching, then my phone vibrated one final time. Another text. Another message from the unknown number. This one was different. Much shorter. Much worse. Wrong woman. For several seconds, I couldn't move. I just stared at those 2 words. Then the SUV slowly began rolling forward. Not fast, not aggressively, just creeping down the street. As if the driver knew there was no reason to hurry. As if they already had exactly what they wanted. And before the vehicle disappeared around the corner, I caught a glimpse of someone sitting in the driver's seat. Someone who appeared to be smiling directly at me. I didn't follow the SUV. For a few seconds, I thought about it. Every instinct I had was telling me to get in my car and go after it. That's usually what happens when you're investigating someone. You get a lead, you follow it. Simple, but nothing about this case felt simple anymore. The vehicle disappeared around the corner, and I just stood there staring at the empty road. My phone was still in my hand. Wrong woman. Those 2 words kept replaying in my head. The person who sent that message knew exactly what I had seen. They knew I thought the woman in the hallway was Rachel. They knew I was standing outside. They knew what I was looking at, which meant they were either watching the house themselves or they had someone inside watching it for them. Neither possibility made me feel good. I got back into my car and called Rachel again. This time she answered immediately. "Where are you now?" I asked. "At a gas station," she said. Her voice was still shaky. I drove to the first place I saw with lights on. I looked at the dark house across the street. "You need to stay there." "I wasn't in that window." "I know." "No, Ethan. You don't understand." She sounded frustrated now. "I never even went near the hallway." I rubbed my forehead. "Then who was standing there?" "I don't know." Neither did I. That was the problem. If someone had been inside the house pretending to be Rachel, then they either had access to the property or had been inside long before I arrived. Both options were terrifying. I told Rachel to stay where she was while I checked the house one more time. She protested. She wanted me to leave immediately. She wanted police officers there first. Honestly, she was probably right. But I needed to know what was inside. The front door was still locked. I walked around the side of the house again and reached the loose fence panel I'd found earlier. The opening was just large enough for someone to squeeze through. Beyond it was a narrow strip of undeveloped land that stretched behind several houses. Tall weeds, trees, overgrown brush. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be seen. I pushed through the opening and followed the path. The beam from my flashlight swept across the ground. At first I didn't find anything. Then I noticed fresh tire tracks. They weren't from the SUV, these were smaller, almost like a utility vehicle or ATV. The tracks led deeper into the trees. I followed them for several minutes. The farther I walked, the quieter everything became. Eventually, the neighborhood sounds disappeared completely. No traffic. No distant televisions. Nothing. Just wind moving through branches overhead. Then my flashlight landed on something unexpected. A folding chair. Sitting alone in the darkness. My pace slowed. The chair faced a gap between the trees. I stepped closer and immediately understood why it was there. Through that gap, there was a perfect view of Rachel's bedroom window. My stomach turned. The chair wasn't old. It hadn't been abandoned. Someone had been sitting there recently. Watching for how long? Days? Weeks? Months? I looked around carefully. That's when I spotted something tucked underneath the chair. A notebook. Small, black, weathered. I picked it up. Most of the pages were filled with dates and times. Nothing else. Just observations. Rachel leaves 8:14 a.m. Rachel returns 6:27 p.m. Kitchen light on 11:03 p.m. Bedroom light off 12:48 a.m. Page after page after page. Years of observations. My hands felt cold. This wasn't a stalker checking social media. This was somebody dedicating enormous amounts of time to monitoring another person's life. Then I reached the final page. Unlike the others, this one contained a complete sentence. Actually, 2 sentences. I read them twice. Then a third time. The handwriting looked rushed, almost angry. It said, "She still thinks he's the one watching. That's why she'll never see me." A chill ran through my entire body. Because suddenly the situation looked very different. The person watching Rachel wasn't claiming to be Victor. They were talking about Victor. As if they were 2 different people. As if the man Rachel feared wasn't the person actually stalking her. I slowly lowered the notebook. For the first time since taking the case, I began to suspect that Rachel's biggest mistake wasn't believing Victor had returned. Her biggest mistake was believing he had ever left. And somehow I was starting to think there might be more than one person involved. As I stood there trying to process everything, a sound came from somewhere behind me. A branch snapped. Not loudly, but close. Very close. I spun around and raised my flashlight. Nothing. Just trees. Shadows, darkness, then another sound. This time to my left. A footstep. I wasn't alone out there anymore. And judging by how quickly the sound stopped after I turned R. For several seconds I stood completely still. When you're alone in the woods at nearly 3 in the morning, Your brain starts playing tricks on you. Every sound feels important. Every shadow looks like a person. I told myself that's exactly what was happening. The branch breaking was probably an animal. The footsteps were probably my imagination. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Because whoever had been watching Rachel from that chair knew I existed. The notebook proved it. And if they knew about me, then there was a good chance they knew I was standing there right now. I slowly backed away from the chair while keeping my flashlight moving across the trees. Nothing. No movement. No figures. Just darkness. Then my phone vibrated. The sudden sound nearly made me drop it. A text message. Unknown number. Again, I stared at the screen. Leave the notebook. I felt my stomach tighten. The message had arrived less than 30 seconds after I picked it up. That meant one thing. Somebody could see me. Right now. I quickly swept my flashlight through the woods again. Still nothing. No matter where I pointed the beam, there was nobody there. Yet someone was obviously watching. I typed back before I could stop myself. Who are you? The reply came almost instantly. The wrong person to follow. Then nothing. No more messages. I wasn't sticking around. I shoved the notebook into my jacket and headed back toward Rachel's property. The entire walk back felt different. Every few steps I found myself looking over my shoulder. Every shadow looked suspicious. At one point I was almost certain I saw someone standing between two trees. But when I aimed my flashlight directly at the spot, there was nothing there. Just empty space. By the time I reached my car, my nerves were shot. I drove straight to the gas station where Rachel was waiting. She was sitting alone inside her SUV near the pumps. The second she saw me pull in, she got out. She looked exhausted, not physically, mentally, like someone who hadn't felt safe in a very long time. I handed her the notebook. She read through several pages in silence. Then her face changed. What? I asked. She pointed toward one of the entries. The observation was dated almost 4 years earlier, long before she'd moved into her current house. Long before she'd even started receiving envelopes. My pulse quickened. That can't be right. That's what I was thinking, she said. The address listed beside the entry belonged to her old apartment, the place she'd lived in before buying her current home. We both realized the same thing at the same time. Whoever wrote this notebook hadn't started watching her recently. They'd been watching her for years, maybe longer. The realization made me feel sick. Most stalkers eventually lose interest. They move on, find another target, become distracted. This person hadn't. This person had dedicated years of their life to monitoring Rachel. And according to the final note, they weren't Victor. At least, that's what they wanted us to believe. Rachel suddenly looked up. I never told you everything. I frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated. For a moment it looked like she might change her mind. Then she sighed. There was someone else. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Back when Victor was investing in my business, he always had someone around. A friend? She shook her head. More like an assistant. Do you know his name? No. Never asked? I did. Victor would always change the subject. That immediately got my attention. People don't usually hide the identities of assistants, unless there's a reason. Rachel stared out the windshield. He was always there. At meetings? She nodded. Restaurants, events, my office. Did he ever talk to you? Almost never. I felt my pulse quicken. Can you describe him? Rachel looked uncomfortable. Tall? How tall? Over 6 feet. Anything else? She thought for a moment. Then her expression changed. I remember his eyes. What about them? They were different. I waited. Rachel swallowed hard. Not scary, not threatening. Just empty, a silence settled between us. Then she quietly added, Victor used to joke that if he disappeared one day, his assistant would still be around. I looked at her. What exactly did he say? Rachel stared straight ahead, then repeated the sentence word for word. He said some people don't know how to stop watching. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Because suddenly that chair in the woods made a lot more sense. The notebook made sense. The text messages made sense. Even the woman in the window started to make sense. Whoever was behind this wasn't acting like someone trying to win Rachel back. They were acting like someone protecting something, maintaining something, continuing something that had started years ago. And if that was true, then the investigation wasn't leading us toward Victor. It was leading us toward the person Victor left behind. The person who had spent years hiding in the background. The person nobody ever paid attention to. The person who might have been watching Rachel this entire time. Then Rachel's phone rang. Both of us jumped. Unknown number. Neither of us moved. The phone continued vibrating on the center console. Over and over. Finally, the ringing stopped. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. Rachel looked at me. I looked at her. Then she slowly pressed play. At first, all we heard was static, then breathing. Slow, steady, close to the microphone. For nearly 15 seconds, that was all there was, just breathing. Then a man's voice spoke. Calm, almost conversational, only 6 words. But they immediately made my blood run cold. Because the voice said, "You weren't supposed to find him." And then the recording ended. Neither of us spoke for several seconds after the voicemail ended. The gas station suddenly felt a lot quieter. Rachel was staring at her phone. I was staring at the dashboard, trying to process what we just heard. The voice hadn't sounded angry. That was the unsettling part. Most threats come with emotion. Fear, rage, desperation. This voice had none of that. The man sounded calm. Like he was discussing the weather. Like discovering him was simply an inconvenience. Eventually, I broke the silence. Did you recognize the voice? Rachel shook her head immediately. No, she sounded certain. Too certain. I looked at her. You sure? Positive, but something about her answer bothered me. Not because I thought she was lying. Because it felt rehearsed. Like she'd already asked herself that question before. I decided not to push it. Not yet. Instead, I focused on the part that mattered. You weren't supposed to find him. The message wasn't talking about Victor. It wasn't talking about Rachel. It was talking about somebody else. Someone important enough to be hidden. Someone connected to everything. I asked Rachel if she remembered anything else about Victor's assistant. Any detail at all. She sat quietly for nearly a minute. Then she remembered something. Years earlier, when Victor was helping finance her business, there had been a warehouse, a small storage facility on the edge of town. Victor occasionally used it for inventory. At least that's what he'd claimed. Rachel had only visited the place once. She didn't know the exact address anymore. But she remembered the area. That was enough for me. The next morning I started digging. The warehouse wasn't difficult to find. The problem was that it had been abandoned for years. According to public records, the property had changed ownership multiple times. Most of the paperwork looked messy. Companies buying companies. Names appearing and disappearing. Dead ends everywhere. Exactly the kind of thing that made investigators suspicious. Around noon, I drove out there. The facility sat near an industrial district that had slowly died over the years. Half the buildings were empty, broken windows, rusting fences, faded signs. The place felt forgotten. The warehouse itself was surrounded by chain-link fencing. Most of it had collapsed. Nobody seemed to be maintaining the property. I parked nearby and walked the perimeter. The building looked dead. But after about 10 minutes, I noticed something. One section of fence had recently been repaired. Not professionally. Someone had wired it together by hand. The metal looked newer than everything around it. That immediately caught my attention. People don't repair fences at abandoned properties for no reason. Somebody wanted access. Or wanted to keep others out. I slipped through the opening and approached the warehouse. The front entrance was chained shut. The side entrance wasn't. The door stood slightly open. Just enough for darkness to spill through the gap. I felt that familiar sensation in my stomach. The one that appears right before common sense starts arguing with curiosity. I should have called the police. I know that now. But investigators become stubborn. sometimes too stubborn. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The smell hit first. Dust, mold, old wood. The interior was enormous. Rows of empty shelves stretched across the building. Most of the space looked abandoned, at least at first. Then I found signs that someone had been there recently. Fresh footprints, water bottles, food wrappers. Not many, just enough. The farther I walked, the stranger things became. Eventually I reached an office area near the back. One room still had power. The discovery stopped me cold. A small lamp glowed inside, not brightly, just enough to illuminate the room. My heart immediately started pounding. Because abandoned buildings aren't supposed to have electricity, and they're definitely not supposed to have lamps running. I approached slowly. The office door was partially open. I pushed it wider. The room looked normal at first. Desk, chair, filing cabinet, nothing unusual. Then my flashlight landed on the wall, and I immediately wished it hadn't. The entire wall was covered with photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe more. Rachel at grocery stores. Rachel entering her office. Rachel driving. Rachel walking her dog. Rachel standing in line at coffee shops. Rachel sitting alone in restaurants. Some photos looked recent. Others were years old. There wasn't a timeline. There wasn't any organization. Just years of someone's obsession covering every inch of the wall. I stepped closer. And that's when I saw my own face. A photograph of me leaving my office. Another one entering Rachel's neighborhood. Another standing beside my car. Someone hadn't just been watching Rachel. They had started watching me too. My pulse accelerated. I turned around slowly. For the first time since entering the warehouse, I felt genuinely afraid. Not uncomfortable, not nervous. Afraid. Because finding those photographs meant one thing. The person responsible wasn't gathering information anymore. They were monitoring the investigation itself. They knew what I was doing, where I was going, possibly even what I was planning next. Then I noticed something sitting on the desk. A digital recorder. Small, black, recently used. A single red light blinked steadily. Recording, I picked it up. Pressed play. At first there was silence, then footsteps, then a familiar voice. My voice. I listened as the recorder played a conversation I'd had with Rachel 3 days earlier. A private conversation. Inside my office. The blood drained from my face. Because there was no possible way anyone should have had access to that recording. Unless someone had been inside my office too. At that exact moment, another sound echoed through the warehouse. A metallic clang. Somewhere deeper inside the building. Not loud, but close enough. I froze. The sound came again. This time followed by something else. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Walking toward the office. And judging by the rhythm, whoever was approaching wasn't trying to hide anymore. I didn't move. The footsteps echoed through the warehouse one slow step at a time. Whoever was approaching wasn't sneaking. They weren't trying to avoid being heard. They wanted me to know they were coming. The sound grew closer. Then stopped. For several seconds, the building became completely silent. I stood frozen inside the office, staring at the doorway. Nothing appeared. No movement. No shadow. Nothing. Then a voice drifted through the darkness. You're further than most people get. A man's voice. Calm, controlled, the same voice from the voicemail. My heart immediately started pounding harder. I stepped backward without taking my eyes off the doorway. Who are you? I asked. The voice chuckled softly, not mockingly, almost like I had asked an obvious question. That's the wrong thing to ask. The silence returned. I realized I was gripping the digital recorder so tightly my fingers hurt. I forced myself to stay calm. The situation felt dangerous, but something about it didn't feel immediate. If this person wanted to hurt me, there had been easier opportunities. That thought didn't make me feel much better, because it meant they probably wanted something else. I slowly moved toward the office door. Why, Rachel? No answer. I took another step, then another. The warehouse remained silent. Finally, The voice spoke again. Because she was chosen. The response sent a chill through me. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. The conviction in his voice sounded genuine, like he completely believed it. People like that are dangerous. The ones who convince themselves they're acting for a reason. The ones who believe they're justified. I stepped out into the warehouse. The flashlight swept across rows of shelves, empty aisles, dark corners. No sign of anyone. Then I saw movement. A figure standing at the far end of the building. Tall, thin, motionless, watching me. The distance made it impossible to see details, but I knew immediately this wasn't Victor. The build was wrong. The posture was wrong. Everything about him felt different. I started walking slowly in his direction. The figure didn't move, didn't run, didn't hide, just stood there. Waiting, then something strange happened. My flashlight passed over a nearby shelf, and I noticed another photograph, then another, then another. Dozens of them, not Rachel. Victor, hundreds of photographs of Victor. Different cities, different years, different clothes, every wall, every shelf, every surface. Covered, I stopped walking. Suddenly, everything felt wrong. Very wrong. Because stalkers usually collect images of their victims, not of other stalkers. I moved closer to one of the photos. Victor was standing outside a restaurant. The picture looked old, years old. On the back, someone had written a date, 8 years earlier. I checked another, 7 years earlier. Another, 5 years earlier. The photographs continued across multiple years. A realization slowly formed in my mind. Someone had been watching Victor. For a very long time, long before Rachel ever entered the picture, long before any of this started, the voice spoke again, this time much closer. You're finally looking at the right person. I spun around. The man stood less than 20 feet away now. I hadn't even heard him move. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked older than I expected. Mid-50s. Dark jacket. Gray hair. Ordinary face. The type of face you wouldn't remember after passing it on the street. Nothing about him stood out, and somehow that made him more unsettling. Because people like him blend into the background. They disappear in crowds. I studied him carefully. Then I noticed something. A faint scar running along his jaw. Rachel's description immediately came back to me. The assistant. The man who was always nearby. The man nobody paid attention to. The man whose name nobody knew. The man standing in front of me smiled slightly, as if he already knew exactly what I was thinking. You remember now. I didn't answer. The smile widened. She finally remembered me. My stomach tightened. You're the assistant. He laughed softly. No. Then his expression changed. For the first time, real emotion appeared on his face. Not anger, not fear. Resentment. Deep resentment. I was never anybody's assistant. The warehouse suddenly felt colder. Because I realized something. This entire investigation had been built on assumptions. Victor was the wealthy investor. Victor was the stalker. Victor was the dangerous one. Victor was the person everyone focused on. Nobody paid attention to the quiet man standing beside him. The quiet man who followed him everywhere. The quiet man who apparently spent years documenting his life. Watching him. Studying him. Obsessing over him. The same way he now obsessed over Rachel. I looked around at the hundreds of photographs. Then back at him. What happened to Victor? The question erased his smile instantly. For several seconds he didn't answer. He just stared at me. Then he said something that immediately made my blood run cold. That's the question that got everyone else into trouble too. A loud crash suddenly echoed somewhere outside the warehouse. Both of us turned toward the sound. The man frowned. For the first time, he looked genuinely concerned. Then headlights appeared through a broken window. Police, someone had called them. The man's eyes immediately returned to mine. And what he said next completely changed the case. Because he looked directly at me and said, Victor isn't the person Rachel should be afraid of. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness before I could stop him. And at that moment, I realized the most terrifying possibility of all. What if Victor had never been the predator? What if he'd been another victim? The police searched the warehouse for almost 3 hours. They found the photographs. They found the recorder. They found the notebook. But they didn't find the man. By the time officers entered the building, he was gone. It was as if he'd vanished. The warehouse had multiple exits, broken fencing, and enough hiding places to lose an entire search team. Nobody was surprised he escaped. What bothered me was something else. The things he left behind, especially the photographs. I spent most of the next day helping detectives sort through them. The deeper we dug, the stranger everything became. At first glance, the photos appeared random. Thousands of pictures collected over years. But eventually, a pattern emerged. The earliest photographs weren't of Rachel. They weren't even of Victor. They were of businesses, buildings, parking lots, restaurants, places. The man had documented locations first, then people, almost like he was constructing a map, tracking movements, connections, relationships, and buried among all those photographs was something unexpected. A picture of Victor entering a hospital, dated 6 years earlier. Then another. Then another. Over 50 photographs taken at the same hospital over nearly 8 months. That caught my attention immediately. Nobody spends that much time documenting hospital visits without a reason. I started requesting records through contacts I developed over the years. It wasn't easy. Most information was protected. But eventually I found something. Victor had been receiving treatment. Not physical treatment, psychological treatment. The discovery surprised me. Everything Rachel described painted Victor as confident and composed, wealthy, successful, in control. Yet according to the records I managed to obtain, Victor had spent years under psychiatric observation. That didn't automatically mean anything. Plenty of people seek mental health treatment. But then I found another detail. Victor repeatedly reported being followed. Nobody believed him. Doctors attributed it to paranoia, stress, delusions. The reports all looked similar. Victor claimed the same man appeared wherever he went. Restaurants, hotels, airports, parking lots, different cities, different states. Always the same man. Watching, listening, following. The descriptions matched Rachel's mysterious assistant almost perfectly. The scar, the height, the expressionless stare. For years, Victor told people someone was stalking him. And for years, nobody took him seriously. I sat in my office staring at the reports for nearly an hour. The implications were disturbing. Because if Victor had been telling the truth, then the assistant hadn't started watching Rachel. He'd started with Victor. Years before. My phone rang. Rachel, the second I answered, I knew something was wrong. She sounded terrified. Ethan, what happened? I found something. My pulse quickened. What? She took a shaky breath. I was cleaning out old storage boxes. I listened. There are photographs. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. What kind of photographs? Pictures of me. That wasn't surprising anymore. Unfortunately, then she added something that changed everything. They're from before I met Victor. I sat upright. What? I've never seen them before. I grabbed my keys immediately. Stay where you are. 20 minutes later, I arrived at Rachel's house. She was waiting at the kitchen table. Spread across the surface were dozens of photographs, school events, college campuses, coffee shops, apartment complexes, years of her life, years before she started her company, years before she ever met Victor, years before any of this should have been possible. I picked up one of the pictures. Rachel was sitting outside a university library. She looked much younger. The photo had clearly been taken from a distance. Another showed her loading groceries into a car, another walking her dog, another leaving an apartment building. The dates spanned almost a decade. I felt genuinely unsettled, because this changed the timeline completely. Victor couldn't have started the obsession. Rachel hadn't even met him yet. Someone else had been watching her long before Victor entered her life. Rachel suddenly pointed toward the back of one photograph. There was handwriting. Just a single sentence. I turned it over. The moment I read it, every piece of the puzzle shifted, because written across the back was, "Subject identified. Continue observation until contact is approved." Not my Rachel. Not I love her. Not anything emotional. The wording sounded clinical, professional, almost like a report. I quickly checked another photograph. More writing. Behavior unchanged. Another. Routine confirmed. Another. No intervention required. My pulse accelerated. This wasn't the language of a stalker, at least not a normal one. It sounded like surveillance. Systematic. Organized. Documented. Rachel looked at me. "What does it mean?" I didn't answer right away. Because honestly, I wasn't sure. The more evidence we uncovered, the less sense everything made. First, Victor looked guilty. Then Victor looked like a victim. Now it appeared someone had been documenting Rachel years before either of them became connected. And whoever was responsible wasn't acting alone. Nobody keeps records this detailed for over a decade without resources, without help, without purpose. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Again, I immediately opened it. For several seconds, I just stared at the screen. Then Rachel noticed my expression. "What is it?" I slowly turned the phone toward her. The message contained only one photograph. Nothing else. No text, no explanation, just a picture. A picture taken less than 5 minutes earlier, through Rachel's kitchen window. Someone had been standing outside the house, watching us, watching the photographs, watching the entire conversation. And in the reflection of the glass behind Rachel, there was a second figure standing inside the kitchen. A figure that neither of us had noticed. For a moment, neither of us moved. I stared at the photograph on my phone. Then I looked up. Then back at the photograph. The reflection was unmistakable. A person was standing behind Rachel. Inside the kitchen. Close enough to touch her. Close enough that if the image had been taken 1 second later, they might have appeared fully in frame. But when I looked around the room, nobody was there. Rachel followed my gaze. "What?" I handed her the phone. The color immediately drained from her face. She stood up so quickly, her chair nearly fell backward. "What the hell is that?" I didn't answer. I was already moving. I checked the hallway first. Empty, then the laundry room. The guest bedroom. Bathroom, garage, every room in the house. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No open windows. No hidden doors. Nothing. And yet the photograph existed. Someone had taken it. Someone had been outside. And somehow a figure had appeared behind Rachel at the exact moment the photo was captured. When I returned to the kitchen, Rachel looked worse than I'd ever seen her. Not panicked. Defeated, like the last bit of certainty she'd been holding on to had finally disappeared. I don't understand. Neither did I. But something about that image bothered me. Not the figure. The timing. The photograph arrived only moments after we'd begun examining the old surveillance pictures. Almost like someone wanted us to see it, wanted us to focus on it, wanted us distracted. That thought hit me so suddenly I stopped walking. The photographs. I grabbed the stack from the table. Rachel looked confused. "What are you doing?" I started sorting through them again. Faster this time. Looking for patterns. Dates, notes, anything. Then I found it. One photograph looked different. The image itself wasn't unusual. Rachel was walking through a parking lot. But the note written on the back wasn't like the others. Instead of observations, it contained a location, an address, and beneath it, a date. Tomorrow's date. Rachel saw it too. What does that mean? I already had a bad feeling. Very bad. Because every other photograph documented something that had already happened. This one documented something that hadn't happened yet. Someone had planned something, and they expected Rachel to be there. The address belonged to an abandoned office complex on the outskirts of town. I recognized it immediately. The property had been vacant for years. Nobody had any reason to visit, which meant if someone expected Rachel to be there tomorrow, they intended to bring her there or lure her there. I immediately contacted the detective assigned to the case. At first, he wasn't convinced. Then I showed him everything: the photographs, the notes, the timeline. Eventually, he agreed to investigate. The plan was simple. The next morning, police would quietly monitor the location. If someone showed up, we'd finally get answers. That night, I barely slept. The entire case had transformed into something much larger than a stalking investigation. There were too many unanswered questions, too many people, too many years. Most importantly, there was still one question nobody could answer. Why Rachel? What made her so important? Around 4 a.m., I finally drifted off. Then my phone rang. The number was blocked. I answered immediately. At first, there was silence. Then breathing. The same breathing from the voicemail. Slow, controlled, patient. I sat up in bed. What do you want? No answer. Then the voice finally spoke. Calm as ever. You keep asking the wrong questions. I gripped the phone tighter. What questions should I be asking? Several seconds passed. Then the man laughed quietly. Not because something was funny, because he sounded disappointed. You still think Rachel was the target? A chill ran through my body. What does that mean? The line remained silent. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Something that instantly connected every strange piece of the investigation. Every photograph, every notebook, every year of surveillance, every unexplained event. Because the voice calmly said, Rachel was never the target. Then the call disconnected. I sat there staring at the dark room, unable to move, unable to think. Because if Rachel wasn't the target, then who was? And more importantly, why had someone spent over 10 years making sure she believed she was? The next morning felt wrong from the moment I woke up. Not because I was tired, not because of the phone call, because for the first time since taking the case, I felt like somebody wanted me to reach the answer. Every clue over the previous few days had been too convenient. The notebook, the warehouse, the photographs, the messages. Each discovery pushed me toward another discovery, almost like someone was leading me. The thought sat in the back of my mind the entire drive to the abandoned office complex. By 8 a.m., detectives had already established surveillance around the property. The building sat at the end of a cracked access road surrounded by dead grass and overgrown trees. Years ago, it had been part of a small corporate park. Now, it looked forgotten. The windows were covered in dust. The parking lot was mostly empty, a place nobody would visit unless they had a reason. I parked beside one of the unmarked police vehicles and joined the detective handling the case. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then another hour passed. Still, nothing. By noon, people were becoming frustrated. Several officers believed the address was meaningless. Just another dead end. Then a black sedan entered the parking lot. Everyone immediately focused on it. The vehicle rolled slowly across the cracked pavement before stopping near the building's entrance. The driver stepped out. My stomach dropped. It wasn't the scarred man. It wasn't Victor. It wasn't anyone I recognized. The man looked to be in his 60s. Gray hair, suit, expensive watch, ordinary appearance, the type of person nobody would notice twice. He looked around calmly before entering the building. Within seconds, detectives moved. 2 officers followed, then 3 more. The rest of us waited outside. The silence felt endless. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, my phone rang. The detective inside the building. His voice sounded strange. Ethan, what happened? There was a pause. Then he said, you need to come see this. 10 minutes later, I was standing inside the abandoned office complex. The place was much larger than it appeared from outside. Several hallways connected dozens of offices. Most were empty. One wasn't. The room sat at the very center of the building. No furniture, no computers, nothing except walls. Walls covered in photographs. Thousands of them. Not Rachel, not Victor. Me, the air left my lungs. Every wall contained photographs of me, my office, my apartment, my car, my family, places I visited, restaurants, gas stations, coffee shops. Years of photographs. Years. I slowly approached one section of the wall. The oldest picture was dated nearly 7 years earlier. 7 years. My hand started shaking. Because 7 years earlier, I had never heard of Rachel. Never heard of Victor. Never heard of any of this. Yet somebody had already been documenting my life. The detective stepped beside me. You know these people? I couldn't answer. Because I was still trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I noticed something written beneath one photograph. A date. A location. A note. Exactly like the notes found on Rachel's photographs. I moved to another picture. Another note. Another location. Another observation. The same system. The same documentation. The same language. Suddenly the phone call from the previous night made sense. Rachel was never the target. I was. My knees nearly gave out. The detective grabbed my arm. You okay? I nodded automatically. But I wasn't okay. Not even close. Because my entire understanding of the case had just collapsed. The room wasn't documenting Rachel. Rachel had been documenting a path toward me. Everything led back to me. The notebooks, the messages, the warehouse, the photographs. Everything. Then one officer called from the opposite side of the room. Found something. We moved toward him. Mounted on the wall was a large corkboard. Unlike everything else, this section was organized. Timeline, photographs, documents, reports, connected by strings. At the center sat a single photograph. A photograph of me. Beneath it were 3 words. Primary observation subject. I stared at those words. The room suddenly felt smaller. The detective beside me slowly turned toward me. What exactly is going on here? I wish I knew. Then another officer emerged from a side office carrying a box. Inside were hundreds of files. Most contained photographs. Records, reports, years of surveillance. The name attached to nearly every document was the same. Victor Hale. Not as a suspect. Not as a victim. As an investigator. My pulse accelerated. I grabbed one of the folders. Inside was a report dated 11 years earlier. The report described a surveillance operation, not conducted by Victor, conducted for Victor. A long-term observation project involving multiple subjects. My eyes scanned the pages. Then stopped. Because listed among those subjects were 2 names, Rachel and me. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. The detective noticed my expression. What? I handed him the report. His face changed as he read. Then he looked back at me. Ethan. What? He hesitated. Then slowly turned the page. A photograph stared back at us. An old photograph. Taken more than a decade earlier. The image showed a group of people standing outside a building. One of them was Victor. Another was Rachel. And standing beside them was me. The problem was simple. I had absolutely no memory of ever being there. The truth behind the window for a long time, nobody spoke. The photograph sat on the table between us. Victor, Rachel, me, standing together. Smiling, as if we knew each other. As if we had met before. The problem was simple. I had absolutely no memory of it. The detectives started asking questions immediately. When was the photo taken? Where was it taken? Who took it? Nobody knew. The back contained only a date, 11 years earlier. I stared at it until my eyes hurt, trying to force some forgotten memory to surface. Nothing came. The detective eventually handed me another folder. Inside were dozens of documents connected to the surveillance operation. Most were heavily coded. Project numbers. Observation reports. Psychological assessments. Schedules, movement logs. The deeper I read, the worse I felt. Because every report described observation, not investigation, not protection. Observation, people watching people. For years, one file finally contained names, real names, Victor Hale, Rachel Morgan, Ethan Brooks, multiple others, all listed under something called continuity program. Nobody knew what that meant. Not the detectives, not me. But one thing became obvious very quickly. Victor wasn't running the operation. He was being monitored too. Just like Rachel. Just like me. Just like everyone else. Then the gray-haired man they arrested finally agreed to talk. The interview took place that evening. I watched through the observation glass. He sat perfectly still. No lawyer, no panic, no confusion. Almost like he'd been expecting this moment for years. The lead detective placed one of the surveillance files in front of him. "What is the continuity program?" The man smiled, not proudly. Sadly, then he said something none of us expected. "It ended years ago." The detective frowned. "What ended?" "The experiment." The room went silent. The detective exchanged a look with his partner. "Explain." The older man leaned back. For the first time he looked tired. Genuinely tired. The purpose was simple. He paused. Find out whether human lives can be predicted. Nobody spoke. He continued. Habits, relationships, decisions, careers, everything. The detective stared at him. "You're telling me people were being watched for decades?" The man nodded. "Some were." My stomach turned. The detective slid my photograph across the table. "What about him?" The man's eyes moved to my picture. Then he smiled faintly. "One of the most interesting subjects." A cold feeling settled into my chest. Subject, not person. Subject. The same language from the photographs. The reports. The notes. Everything. The detective kept pushing. Eventually, the entire story emerged. Years earlier, a privately funded behavioral research project had begun operating through shell companies and fake consulting firms. Most participants never knew they were being observed. Researchers tracked habits, relationships, decisions, career paths, everything. The goal wasn't scientific progress. It was prediction. They wanted to know whether human behavior could be forecast years in advance, whether lives could be mapped before they happened. Most projects failed. Some continued. Mine continued. Rachel's continued. Victor's continued. For reasons nobody fully understood. The program officially collapsed years ago. Funding disappeared. Researchers left. Records were destroyed. Most people moved on. Except a few. The true believers. People who became obsessed. People who couldn't let go. People like the scarred man. People like the gray-haired man. People who spent years continuing observations after the project ended. Because they no longer cared about research. They cared about control. The detective eventually asked the question that had haunted me since the beginning. "What happened the night at Rachel's house?" The old man finally looked directly into the observation glass. Directly at me. And for a moment I felt like he had known I was standing there the entire time. Then he answered. "The woman in the window wasn't Rachel." A chill ran through my body. The detective immediately leaned forward. "Who was it?" The old man looked down. Then quietly replied, "Another observer." The room went silent. According to him, the scarred man realized the investigation was getting too close. He staged everything. The photographs, the messages, the sightings, even the woman in the hallway. The goal was never to frighten Rachel. The goal was to guide me. Every clue, every discovery, every lead. They weren't hiding from me. They were leading me exactly where they wanted me to go. Toward the records, toward the truth, toward the project, toward myself. Because the moment I discovered I was a subject, the experiment reached its conclusion. I remember leaving the station sometime after midnight. The city felt different, smaller, less familiar. Like something fundamental had shifted. For weeks afterward, I tried convincing myself the nightmare was over. The arrests were made. The files were seized. The investigation was closed. Rachel moved away. The scarred man disappeared, before authorities could locate him again. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least it looked normal. Then 3 months later, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, no sender. Inside was a single photograph, nothing else. The image showed me standing outside the police station on the night of the interview. I had no memory of anyone taking it. Written on the back were 6 words, the exact same 6 words from the very beginning. You should have listened to her. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the photograph. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a reflection. In the glass door behind me, someone was standing several feet away. Watching, the image wasn't clear enough to identify them, but I recognized the posture immediately. The same posture from the woods, the warehouse, the surveillance photos, the same motionless stance. The scarred man, he was never arrested, never found, never identified. And according to that photograph, he was still watching. The worst part? The picture had been taken 2 days after the investigation officially ended, which means somebody followed me after everything was over. Maybe for days, maybe for weeks. Maybe they're still following me now. Sometimes when I'm sitting alone at night, I'll catch myself looking out a window longer than necessary, checking parked cars, watching reflections, looking for familiar faces. I never find anything, at least not directly. But every once in a while, I get the feeling that somebody is standing just outside my line of sight, patiently observing, waiting, continuing, and after everything I've learned, I honestly don't know whether that's paranoia or whether the observation simply never ended. The end.